Greetings everyone, my name is Sai, and can you believe it? Cuphead is finally out. I feel like we've been waiting for this game for forever now. I believe I named my game of the year, or not my game of the year, but one of my most anticipated games of the year for E3 for at least 2 years running now. But I think we've seen it for the last 3 or 4 years each E3. So this game has been a long time coming, and let me just say, I don't know exactly what I was expecting from this game. I try to go into games knowing as little as possible, given that my job is to generally know stuff about video games, knowing as little as I possibly can under the circumstances, and with as few expectations as I possibly can. So I guess my main expectations for the game was that it was going to be like a 2, 3, 4 hour boss rush with some cool bosses here and there, but the main draw of the game was probably going to be the aesthetic and the art style and whatnot. And I didn't really have much hopes for it beyond that. I thought okay, there might be a cool boss fight or two, but I'm mostly here for the aesthetic. I don't really expect the gameplay to do anything special. And indeed, that's kind of true, but I must admit, I have been having a ridiculous amount of fun with this game, and it's exceeded those expectations because it's fucking phenomenal and I love it. So, first of all, let's tackle the obvious thing. If you're playing Cuphead, you're probably playing it for the art. And, I mean, yes, they have nailed everything about that, 30s, 40s style aesthetic of, really classic cartoons. Before we figured out what cartoons were, and when everything had, faces and shit, from the people to, the sun in the sky, everything had a face and was smiling. They have captured that, retro Warner Bros. Disney aesthetic absolutely perfectly. I believe they even went to, an insane, psychotic degree of detail in order to capture that. I believe I saw, a making of on Cuphead at one point, and one of the things that the developers were talking about was that they literally drew on, the old-style paper they used to use, and scanned the paper into computers using, old-style techniques, and drew that, everything about the way they've colored this game and made all the art for it is, authentic to how they used to make the actual cartoons that this game is aping the style of. So that is incredible to me. The guys who made this game just have a metric fuck ton to be proud of, because they've really gone above and beyond the Call of Duty in making this game look fantastic. There are not enough words in my thesaurus to describe just how good this game is, so I'm going to have to make do with words like fantastic and phenomenal and melting my eyes because of how beautiful it is. I'll have to make do with those terms, but holy crap, guys, this game is so much better than I could possibly bring across to you. So the art style is phenomenal, but also incredible is the general aesthetic they managed to capture. I feel like I'm playing this game and an old-timey Nickelodeon. I've gone to the theaters and I'm playing this game as it's being projected onto a screen because of all the little graphical details they added on top of everything else, the blurs and the grains and the specific artifacting of the old-timey film reels. It just looks so incredible. And the bosses are all creative as hell. They play perfectly into Cuphead's cartoony aesthetic as the bosses morph nonsensically into things. For example, there was this one time I was fighting this Zeppelin lady, and she was pretty cool for the first 3/4 of the boss battle. And at the very end, as she's dying, she morphs into a gigantic moon. And there's this other boss battle where you're fighting two frogs, and at one point they just turn into a gigantic slot machine, and it makes no sense, but it blends so well together with this general world the game's created, and the animation sells it. It's just, oh, it's so incredible. When that boss turned into the moon or whatever, I said aloud, holy shit, because it was so creative and so interesting and so, So I've gotten that out of the way. That's the most obvious thing I could have ever possibly spent 5 minutes talking about. I mean, you take one look at a screenshot for this game, everyone instantly agrees it's beautiful. That's the main thing this game has going for it. And indeed, it capitalizes on that perfectly. Now that said, there was one thing I was a bit worried about going into the game. I was worried the devs would have spent so much time perfecting this aesthetic by drawing shit onto old papers and scanning it in via like old methods or whatever. I was worried they'd be so dedicated to that they would forget to make an actually good game beneath that. I was worried they would make boss designs and things, but the boss designs would look cool and they'd be interesting to see, but they wouldn't be fun to fight, or they would be difficult or frustrating to fight because of how they were designed. Like, they wouldn't take traditional game design conventions into account because they'd be so worried about sticking as closely as possible to that aesthetic. That's what I'm trying to say. I was really worried that they would, throw traditional game design to the wind in favor of making the game look as good as it possibly could, and the game would suffer for that. Those concerns absolutely alleviated. The guys who made this game know exactly what the fuck they're doing. The game is fluid as hell. It's just wonderful. Everything about this game is just wonderful. So my biggest concern for the game was that the art style would detract from the main gameplay, and I'm happy to see that that is not at all the case. So, other things that I love about this game, and there are a lot of things that I love about the game. One of the weird things that I've latched onto because I'm autistic like that is specifically the narrator's voice. Like, I can't get over how much I love the narrator's voice. It reminds me of the guy who did episode recaps for The Legend of Korra. It feels like they just found this perfect, absolutely perfect, like 20s radio announcer voice. And I wouldn't be surprised if they even got him to record the same microphone they used back in the 20s and some shit like that, just because of how dedicated they are to doing this. But the announcer in this game is amazing, and all his lines are great, and they're quotable as hell. Like, a brawl is surely brewing. Good day for a swell battle. Here goes. A great plan and then some. It's on. Like, every time the narrator talks, I'm like, yes, say more things, because I just love your voice so much. So, the narrator's great, the general art style is great, the aesthetic is great, the bosses are all great, and the soundtrack's great too. The soundtrack does adhere to the sort of stuff you would hear in the old cartoons, and like everything else in the game, they almost have a psychotic level of attention to that stuff. One of the things I was pleasantly surprised by, because I wasn't expecting it, was the main menu has like a theme song playing. Like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like an intro, an OP. What's coming to my mind is OP, but that's the anime term. Theme song, whatever. Like the opening bit before a cartoon. The game has like an opening theme song, and I love that so much, and it's wonderful, and everything about this game is wonderful, and everything about this game makes me smile, and this game is amazing. So that's the general art style and aesthetic covered. Now, digging more into the gameplay here. The gameplay essentially boils down to a series of boss battles, and I'm about to commit the greatest gaming journalism sin imaginable, because I'm going to compare Cuphead to Dark Souls. So, very much like Dark Souls, the game is mostly about learning the boss's patterns, or specifically like the bosses in Dark Souls. Cuphead is basically nothing but bosses. There are a few like running gun segments here that have been added in just so that you're not only fighting bosses, but those are optional. You only do them to earn money, which you can then spend on upgrades, which we'll talk about in a second. So those are purely optional, but the main meat of the gameplay is the boss battles, right? So, like the bosses in Dark Souls, what the bosses in this game essentially boil down to is a pattern recognition contest. So you go in there, and you get stomped on like the first 20 times, but eventually you learn all the patterns for their attacks, and then the boss becomes easy. Or not easy, but, it starts off unfair, but as you learn the fight, the favors gradually tip in your the balance gradually tips in your favor, rather. So, I really like that. The thing is, I talked in my video about Hollow Knight, how Hollow Knight recaptured the magic of Dark Souls, I believe was the video title. I talked about how that game, there was this one boss fight in the game against the Mantis Lords, and it was great, because it started off and you're fighting this just one boss, and then eventually that one boss, you beat him, and then two more clones of that boss come in and fight you, and so the second phase of that fight is just fighting, two of the guy you were trying to, you were barely surviving against in the first round. So now you're fighting against two of those. So it's like the ultimate test of your memory recognition skills. And I said that was the best part of Hollow Knight, because that required you to like learn all the boss's strategies. But when you got it down, you were like ducking and weaving, like, seconds, milliseconds before you were about to get hit. And it just felt so good. And that is, that was like one boss in Hollow Knight. That is every boss in Cuphead. Every boss in Cuphead gives me that feeling, and it's so amazing, and I love it so much. Holy crap. Now, the game is hard. There was a lot of there were a lot of memes going into the game because of the guy from whatever. I know it's not from Polygon, because I got corrected on that the last time I brought it up. The shitty press guy who played Cuphead and couldn't get past the tutorial because he got stuck on the fucking box or whatever. There's been a lot of memes going around about, oh, the game is too difficult. Wow, I beat the tutorial. Surely I am the best gamer ever. And sure enough, I had a crack at that guy's expense on Twitter myself when I started playing the game, because you can't not, right? It's too stupid. So there's been a lot of memes going around about, oh, Cuphead is so hard. But no, Cuphead is actually legitimately challenging. But it's challenging in the same way that Dark Souls is challenging. It's very much like Dark Souls. I know that people don't like it when you compare shit to Dark Souls, but it really is exactly like that. The bosses are just point for point exactly like what you get in Dark Souls. You learn their patterns, and they start off challenging, but eventually you learn them, and you can triumph after you've done that. So the game is, like Dark Souls, the game is hard but fair in that regard, and I love that. Honestly, the biggest complaint I can level towards the game right now is that I feel like it being so hard almost detracts from it in a way, because I never feel like I can stop and appreciate the animation. I feel like I just want to go back and after I beat the game and watch a Let's Play of it, just so I can like see all the beautiful animation and not have to be worried about constantly dying. Right? Like, I was fighting this flower boss, and towards 3/4 of the way through the fight, he transforms into his new form, and I was like, oh shit! But I didn't get to see that form, really, because I was too busy trying to avoid all of his attacks. So he transforms into this new cool thing, and I wanted to stop and look at it and appreciate how awesome it looked, but I couldn't because I was too busy trying not to die. And sure enough, I beat him on, I beat that phase on my first try. It took me a couple tries on that boss specifically. By the time I got to that phase, I was able to beat him without dying. So I didn't get this, I'd have to replay that boss fight again just to get a good look at him, or more likely go watch a Let's Play of the game after I'm done, just so I can stop, smell the proverbial roses and admire just how gorgeous this game is. So the bosses, which as I said previously, the game mostly consists of, tend to boil down to jump at certain times to dodge attacks. Basically a series of platforming challenges, right? A series of increasingly difficult platforming challenges. But there is a bit more to it than that. So there's added depth in the game with the inclusion of a parry system and with the super meter. So at the bottom of the screen, you're constantly building up your super meter as you deal damage to bosses in the form of the little cards next to your HP. And the super meter can be charged to do individually strong attacks. So for example, if you have one card, you can activate the super meter and shoot like a Hadouken or whatever. But if you charge it up to like 5 meters max, then you do like an ultimate badass attack that does a shit ton of damage to the boss. So there is that, and you can also charge the super meter by doing parries, which is basically if you see a pink colored projectile, you can do a second jump off of that, and that will parry that attack, deleting it and also filling your super meter by like half a card or whatever. So the game is superficially pretty simple, but there is a lot of added depth by, being able to master the parry system and being able to charge your super meter properly. And in addition to that, there is also added depth by all the different gameplay styles there are. So there is a shop in the game that you can buy items from, and these items will fundamentally change basically every aspect of your playstyle. So you can get like a special upgrade, like for example, the one that I always stuck with was the one that slightly decreases my beam's attack power, but also gives me an extra heart. Because I found that when I'm fighting a boss and when I'm constantly dying to them, having an extra chance before dying is way more valuable than pretty much anything else the game could offer me, just because you are limited to 3 strikes and you're out sort of game design. So in addition to buffs like that, there are also changes to your basic gun firing pattern. You can get like a shotgun blast that does like fires 3 beams at once as opposed to just the one, but also each individual beam is weaker. But if you're fighting like a giant boss that takes up most of the screen and all your bullets are going to be hitting them anyway, it's probably worth it to take that, even though there is a bit less of a damage. So I feel like a lot of bosses require you to customize your playstyle on a boss-by-boss basis, just depending on what that specific boss is and how it works and how you have to beat it. And that's really interesting. So there's a lot of added depth in specifically what power-ups and pickups you're using. And of course, that relates back to the run-and-gun segments. So the run-and-gun segments in the game are the only way to get cash. And I feel like the run-and-gun segments are the worst part of the game, because I feel like the controls of the game are not really designed. You know, they're designed for, like, precise platforming against, like, a giant boss taking up most of the screen that you can easily see. Whereas in the run-and-gun segments, basically the run-and-gun segments are just a gauntlet of enemies that die in one hit, right? But most of the challenge of the run-and-gun segments comes from the bullshit enemies who just, like, run at you, and when they touch you, they hurt you. Like, that's where the vast majority of the challenge in these comes from. Pretty much every other enemy is really easy to avoid. Like, I had one run-and-gun segment that threw in, like, a mini boss battle at the end, and that was piss easy compared to what I had been fighting. But all the damage that I took in the run-and-gun segments, like 90% of the time, was from the guys who just, like, run headfirst at you. And that feels kind of bullshitty. I don't like that. It's very similar to my complaints about Hollow Knight. Like, I understand that enemies need to do damage to you when you touch them. That, you know, is a pretty core part of the gameplay here. But I do think the enemies that do nothing else but just run at you until they touch you and then you get hurt are kind of lazy from a game design standpoint, and more to the point, just aren't fun to fight. So the vast majority of the time in the run-and-gun segments, the only thing giving me trouble was the guys just running headfirst at me. And once you are able to figure out their specific patterns and timings, then the run-and-gun segments are really just piss easy excuses for gameplay, essentially. They're by far the worst part of the game, but even then they're only just sort of okay. They're the worst part of the game in that every other part of the game is so great by comparison, right? So that isn't particularly great, but I also don't mind it because, like I said, they are optional. They only play into the optional upgrades that you don't particularly need. So I don't mind that much. And going back to the difficulty for a second, I've been watching Jesse and Krendor do their Let's Play of Cuphead on their channel. Like, I've not been able to do multiplayer on Cuphead yet, but it seems to me like the multiplayer in Cuphead is significantly easier than the single player is, because I assume the bosses are all balanced so that if you have 2 players versus 1, they take like twice as many hits, right? That just makes sense. But it seems like it's way easier in multiplayer, because when your friend dies, a little like ghost comes out from their body and flies to the top of the screen. And if you can get to them in time and parry them, which is just press the jump button on their ghost, then they come back to life with 1 health. And so far as I'm aware, you can do that pretty much eternally. Like, there's no upper limit to how many times you can resurrect your friend, so long as you can get to their ghost in time. You compare that to the single player, which is 3 strikes, you're out, and then you have to restart the boss and there's no saving throw there. It seems like it's significantly easier to play through the game on multiplayer than it would be for single player. So I don't particularly mind that, because I don't feel like Cuphead is too hard in single player, even though I've just been playing single player. And I don't feel like I'm being unfairly challenged, but I do think that if I was playing multiplayer with a friend, I would have to, like, insert a house rule, like, okay, we cannot resurrect each other when we die, because otherwise that would make the game too easy. So I'm not complaining about this from the factor of, oh, I think the single player is too hard. I'm saying I don't think the multiplayer would be fun because it looks too easy. You don't really have to learn the boss fights in there, or at least nearly as much as you do for the single player, at least. So I don't know that I would recommend the game for the multiplayer experience, or if you are going to pick it up primarily for the multiplayer experience, I would probably recommend inserting a house rule like you can't revive each other, just to make the game a bit more fun. And one last thing I do want to mention, this seems to be something I've been like saying about literally everything recently, but holy shit, this game would be perfect for the Switch, and it needs a Switch port like instantly. I've been saying that about every indie game lately, but Cuphead specifically, like even if you are going to play it multiplayer, the multiplayer aspect works perfectly for what the Switch can provide with its like local couch co-op shit. So, this game really, really needs a Switch port. Okay, so those are my general thoughts that I've had playing the game. I'm about 2 hours into it right now. I do want to finish it. Hopefully I'm good enough to get through the rest of the game. I feel like there's a very strong possibility I'll hit a brick wall at some point and won't be able to continue. Like right now I'm fighting this clown balloon guy on like a roller coaster, and that fight's kicked my ass like 20 times already. So I do want to play through as much of the game as I can, and I will continue to play the game even after this video is finished, just because I am having that much fun, and just because I do think the game is that amazing. So, I'll put it like this, right? I would have gladly paid $30 or even $40 for this game, just because of the amount of love put in, and the amount of detail and everything, how the game comes together as a cohesive whole. I would have gladly paid 30 or 40 bucks for this. But the game's actual price is 20 bucks. And so far as I'm concerned, that is an absolute steal. If you take nothing away from this video, take away that this game is completely worth your time, no matter what the price is. Sometimes I like advise wait for it to go on sale because it's not quite worth the asking price. Cuphead is absolutely worth the asking price already. So, I mean, wait for a sale if you want, but there is more than enough content here to get you through the game as is. And that's one other thing I want to mention really quick. I was actually insanely surprised by how long this game looks. Like, I've played it for like 2 to 3 hours already, and I've only gotten through like the first zone. That's 1 of 4, and there's like 5 or 6 boss fights in each zone, not counting the various running gun segments and the specific interesting encounters that zone has within it. So this game has a metric fuck ton of shit. Like I said at the start of the video, I was expecting this game to be like 3 to 4 hours long max, just because of how difficult it must have been to create each individual boss fight using traditional animation in the style they have. But this game seems like it could easily last me like 7 to 8 to 9 hours. So an insane amount of content, all like highly polished, as highly polished as you can get like a boss rush game like this. Just holy crap, guys, I cannot recommend this game enough. I'm having a ridiculous amount of fun. Highly, highly recommended. Would be surprised this video doesn't end up on my top 5 of the year list. It is that good. So I do believe I've said my piece. Cuphead, 20 bucks on Steam. Definitely go pick it up. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Later. Special thanks to my wonderful Patreon patrons, Talbob, Renataja, Soul, Mythnut, Ludwig, Calvin Ryman, Jada Prague, Salisbucky, Forgotten Paladin, Joe Anderson, and Princess Scotch Tape.
You pass, 'cause you ain't done everything. Bring me those contracts, come on, bring them to the king. If you haven't finished your class, haven't worked assiduously, no, I cannot let you pass. Don't you mess